Welcome to our webinar this morning, or our online event. I don't know if any of our colleagues are on mute, if they could go on mute, because I can hear someone making noise. So apologies for, we've just had a bit of a clunky start as with technology. Welcome to this joint online event between the 5% Club and Digital Skills Solutions. I'm Jill Cronin, I'm Director of Operations at the 5% Club. For those of you who don't know us, the 5% Club is a skills campaigning charity. We were started in 2013 by Leo Quinn, Group Chief Executive of the 5% Club, Group Chief Executive of Balfour Beatty and our founder of the 5% Club. Leo started the 5% Club because he saw a lack of skills in the workplace and high youth unemployment. And I think for what we're all facing post-COVID, the youth employment agenda is certainly coming to the fore again. Our members, of which we have nearly 500, aspire or have 5% of their workforce in Earn and Learn, and being that apprenticeships, people on grad programmes and sponsored students. And we're delighted so many of you are joining us today. We've got about 180 people registered. I hope everyone's managing to get in and join us as we go through this. We are filming today's presentation, and we are also going to circulate the actual presentations itself to all attendees, and the film will be available on our websites, Digital Skills and 5% Club, in the next few days. All attendees, your mics will be on mute and your videos will be off, and it will only be our speakers that you'll be able to see and hear. Diversity and inclusion is a vast area, and a really difficult one to cover everything. So today's 1 hour session is really just a brief overview about strategy into practice. And we are delighted that Neil from GCHQ is going to talk about neurodiversity, about one aspect of diversity and inclusion. But never more than ever has the whole D&I agenda been more important. So we're looking forward to hearing from everyone. The way this will work is that our speakers will do their 10 minutes, and then there'll be a Q&A. On the Q&A, what we'll do is we'll ask our participants, our attendees, at the bottom of your screens there is the Q&A button. If you can push your questions through that, I will try and monitor them and theme them, and then I will ask our speakers those questions as they come at the end in their session, so that's how we'll get it through, rather than get people to speak. And really, that's all I wanted to cover. Carlos, I'm going to hand over to Carlos, the Managing Director of Digital Skills Solutions. And thanks to Carlos, they're new members. And one of the team, Matt, rang me up and just said, we're new members, really pleased to join, and never want to miss an opportunity when a new member approaches me. I said, would you like to do an online event with us? So, and here we are. So Carlos, over to you. Carlos, you're on mute. You're still muted. You need to unmute yourself.
There we go, the dreaded mute button. Thanks, Jill. Good morning, everyone. Really pleased to see so many of you here today. Really, I'll just get a quick overview of DSS, or Digital Skills Solutions. We're a specialist provider of digital skills training, uniquely tailored to meet the needs of our clients. Predominantly, we deliver high-level technical digital skills needed by employers, particularly in the areas of business analytics, cloud computing, cybersecurity, and data analysis. However, because study after study has shown the benefit of any digital skills training, to be frank, on business productivity and the earning potential of individuals, we also provide training on those essential digital skills which begin the journey and provide the stepping stones to developing those broader, specific, high-level skills that really make a difference. And also, whilst we deliver training across the UK and Europe, our roots are firmly embedded in our local community, which in our case happens to be Newham in East London. So perhaps just take a quick look at how DSS supports diversity and inclusion within our business. So next slide. Okay, next. So this year we've worked with 55 businesses and have trained over 600 students and apprentices. Next. 82% of our students are from a non-white background. We work in partnership with a number of organisations to ensure that young people have access to really great apprenticeship opportunities. An example of this is in September 2019, we worked in partnership with a charity, Leadership Through Sport and Business, and NatWest RBS, and we offered a 4-week digital boot camp for 15 vocationally gifted young people within Newham to access NatWest's apprenticeship degree programme. And we believe that was the first time that non-academic students had been recruited onto the programme within NatWest, and it was really well received. Next one. 27% of our students and apprentices are female. Clearly there's some work to do there still. However, data published last September showed that only 19% of females study computing courses generally. So we are making inroads into that. And certainly within DSS, we've designed women-only IT courses. And if you were to visit the DSS offices, you'd see that we actively promote women's roles in the development of IT. People such as Ada Lovelace, who amongst many successes published the world's first algorithm, or Hedy Lamarr, who you may recognise as one of the most famous film actresses in the 1940s. What you may not realise is that she also painted an early version of frequency hopping as a way of secretly communicating, and that formed the basis of the technologies that underpin today's Wi-Fi and mobile communications. So, you know, we really do focus on the fantastic role that that ladies and females have brought to IT. Next one. So you can see the majority of our students are aged between 16 to 24, although we do have apprentices of all ages, and we provide our new age IT courses, which are aimed specifically at older clients. And then I think finally, just to reflect on the fact that 13% of our students and apprentices have learning difficulties and or disabilities. We have, within DSS, I think, a unique role of apprentice wellbeing manager. It's a wonderful lady called Sue, who provides learning support and more broadly, actually, liaises closely with vulnerable apprentices and their employers to ensure that their physical and emotional wellbeing is being considered and properly cared for. So that's a really quick overview of D&I at DSS. I hope you found it informative. I'm really looking forward to hear from our main speakers. So without further ado, I will hand you back to our host, Jill.
Thanks, Carlos. Thanks, good to hear. So Estefano, if we can move on to Sarah's slide, I'm delighted to introduce Sarah Maskell MBE. I met Sarah a couple of years ago when she was at the RAF, and I know she's had other iterations since then, and we're delighted to have Sarah. She's now currently at, or just started at the Home Office. So Sarah, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think it's fascinating to hear where we are today. As was just mentioned, we met a few years ago doing a similar event. And really, I remember my presentation was very much around the need and the business case for diversity. So it's interesting to see in the 2 or 3 years that we've been talking about this, that the evolution has gone from why do we need diversity and inclusion and how we can equip people with the skill set to be able to go and have the discussion, to now why and how we can create an inclusive, a diverse and inclusive strategy for businesses to adopt. So I wanted to work through today as the first speaker, just to give you an overview of my sort of, not just top tips, but things that have really shaped and changed the way that I view the development of a strategy. I will apologise if I need to cough or take some water on. I was online yesterday for most of the day and realised that I couldn't speak by the end of the day, so apologies. I think the best thing to take out of the strategic approach for diversity and inclusion is that to really understand what a strategy is and isn't. It is a space to communicate business objectives, the direction of your business, the direction of your department or sector or group. And when we talk about strategy, this is not just talking about blue chip organisations or government departments that have a public sector duty. This is about any group or communication community that really want to shape some change. So communicating the business objective is actually just about articulating the journey that you want to go on and where you want to be at the end of the journey. What does good look like? For me, this is also about delivering change and the transitional journey to get there. So when you're developing your strategy, there is a whole bundle of management speak, and you know we've all sat in those rooms where we're talking about blue sky thinking, and we must put pen to paper, and we must start with a clean sheet. For me, this is about real myth busting. Where do you want to go? How are you going to get there? And more importantly, how are you going to take people along with you on that journey? So for me, about diversity and inclusion is around identifying those groups that you want to participate. You want to maximize their participation, and you also want to increase their representation in your end state. So what your good looks like at the end. And I think at this point, it's also worth understanding that your strategy needs to be responsive and will change. So I've seen strategies that have got a 15-year life cycle, and I've also seen strategies that have got 6 months. And I don't think there is a right answer. I think it's about being receptive and responsive to what your business physically needs. If you're a new organisation that is just starting out, then a shorter term strategy might be entirely suitable. But there's also the perception that others might have of you for lacking ambition if you fail to project that you're going to have a place in society in a year or 2 years' time. So one of my sort of key recommendations would be is to be honest and open about where you want to be. If somebody asked you and you were proud to be able to talk to them either in an elevator pitch or not, and you wanted to be able to say, in 2 years' time, I want to be developing events that are run virtually, they are hitting 500 to 1,000 people a year, then that is your 2-year strategy. And you can work back from that. But aspirationally, you could also plot that out to 4 years. And it doesn't mean that there's going to be a direct comparator that you want to reach 2,000 people in 4 years. Your objectives for the 4-year point are going to be should be super challenging. They should be aspirational. And there should be a sense of realism the closer you get to where you are now. They are a really effective handrail to how you embed inclusion. So looking at your legal responsibilities, looking at the voices or hearing the voices of your people, whether that's through pulse surveys that are done sporadically through a business or group, or whether it's something more formal like annual reporting or an annual people survey or engagement survey. I use the analogy of handrail because I think sometimes we can use strategies as barriers, but to provide it as a handrail gives people an understanding that it's to assist them. It's to guide their thinking and to guide their behaviours. And it must also focus on outcomes. But I think it's really important as well to articulate what it isn't. It isn't a plan. You can have a strategic plan or a delivery plan, but the strategy is those real pithy comments and the visionary picture of where you want to be. And not just, we want to be diverse and inclusive. How and why? Are you wanting to be diverse because you want to aim towards a bigger target market for your education environment, for your business, for your product? Are you wanting to be inclusive so that you can fill a gap in the market, for example? Underpinning all of the speakers today, I'm fairly sure there'll be a common thread about communications. A diversity and inclusion strategy must have as part of it a consideration about your comms and engagement campaign. How are you going to communicate to people about the strategy, but also how are you going to revert and recycle those comments back in to give you points of reflection so that you can move forward consciously as a diverse and inclusive organisation. You should try to reduce acronyms. Obviously, it was mentioned earlier, I was in the military. We used to use an incredible amount of acronyms. I then moved into banking, which also uses acronyms, and I'm now in the Home Office, which has its own set. those acronyms can create barriers to people wanting to question or feel that they need to question where your intent hasn't been clear. There's also a final point about accessibility. You know, imagine the irony of having a diversity and inclusion strategy that isn't inclusive or it isn't accessible. So making sure that the glamorous graphics don't sacrifice the intent of your strategy. So engagement with people, making sure that they can continue to access and engage with the strategy. They're really far more important than the words that go in the strategy. Your people will shape the reputation and the outcomes that that strategy aims to deliver. And you can always tweak those objectives within the strategy at the 1 year or 2 year point. That concludes my points for today, but I think we're open to a short question period, and I'll be hanging around as well for questions later.
I should unmute myself. Thank you, Sarah. Someone has posted a question asking about the UK Armed Forces, about, you know, that recognises the value of diversity and does recruit from a number of unrepresented groups. But unemployment for service leavers post-transition remains high, particularly for BAME. And whilst I guess most people in the military have started as apprentices, so we want to keep it around the apprenticeship theme. But what do you have any views about veterans within the D&I strategy and within the D&I piece?
So it's a fantastic question. I genuinely don't feel that the veteran strategy that most organisations apply recognises diversity. So through my own experience, I left the military and went into a reserve role and then left fully. When you arrive somewhere as a veteran, people expect to see Captain Tom. People expect a 100-year-old person with a white beard and a walking stick. And for a not male, not 90 plus, not physically using a walking aid, albeit I do actually use crutches occasionally because of an injury, there's this dislocation of expectation. So I think there is an absolute demand that businesses, when they're looking at diversity and inclusion, think about beyond the protected characteristics. From a veterans perspective, I'm actually trying to work at the moment with a number of not only the veteran organisations, but organisations that have veteran programmes to look at how they can diversify their talent stream. Because a lot of the financial sector, for example, that I left, a lot of the veteran programmes are aimed at very high intensity, full-time roles, relocating to London or main headquarter environments globally. And actually they don't meet and satisfy some of the requirements from veterans wanting to seek education, re-employment. And modern apprenticeships and the apprenticeship language that I heard just before with our previous speaker about, you know, these aren't 16, it's not limited to a younger end of apprenticeships. This is people wanting to seek new opportunities and retraining. So I do think there needs to be greater sensitivity within people's diversity and inclusion strategy to recognise veterans, and diverse veterans brings with it a whole new opportunity for people to seek re-employment. I'm happy to touch base with that person offline if they wanted to, because I think there is a real part of the opportunity is unchallenged at the moment. Yeah.
And there's another question, which I'll just do one more with you, then we probably need to move on as ever these things go quickly. Someone's asked us, sorry, when the questions come in, it shoves down. Keep on losing it. What's your view about weaving that diversity and inclusion piece into an early career strategy, be it with apprentices, grads, students, placements? You know, how do you embed it in that early careers?
So my experience in the last few years has been that people are almost unsighted or unaware of how they could maximise their returns on their early joiner or early careers policies and strategies by being more diverse and inclusive. You know, I worked on a project most recently about neurodiverse recruitment into financial services, and some of the challenges that we had were about myth busting. You know, there is a space, there is a career available, and actually one of our recruitment pathways was, once we had a look and did a full evaluation and made sure where people were dropping off, and used people like Action About Autism to really challenge ourselves about how people are accessing the recruitment materials. It improved recruitment for everybody and the accessibility for everybody. So I think engaging with early careers is vital. Having an element within your diversity and inclusion strategy that focuses specifically on early careers and early engagement and apprenticeships is going to be vital as we move forward. And I don't think it needs a new strategy. I think it's just adapting the current strategy to be more responsive to that requirement.
Great, thank you. There's a couple of other questions that have come in, and Caroline, I've noticed yours has just come in about returnerships. If I may, I'll park that, because I think if we move on and then we can have a general Q&A at the end, and I'll jot down those sorts of questions. So I think that's just to keep it moving and make sure everyone's got enough time. Sarah, that's brilliant. We'll bring you in again at the end. Thank you so much. And we'll now move on to Karima, if we can flick onto her slide, please, Estefana. So Karima Khandker, until very recently, was Head of Employment Skills at the Heathrow Airport. And Karima and I have known each other for quite a few years. Karima has been a fantastic supporter of the 5% Club, and that's where we did our event a couple of years ago, which was fantastic. And we want to build on that further. So Karima, I shall hand over to you. And as I say to people, if you want to ask questions, please post them by the Q&A. Some are coming in via chat as well, but don't worry, we'll monitor both. But please do post your questions, and we'll try and turn to make sure we can cover all of them and theme them. Over to you, Karima.
Thanks, Jill. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. As Jill said, my name's Karima, and I've led until just because I'm conscious of time and what Jill has said. So that's what diversity and inclusion means to me. So when I start to look at strategy, and Sarah's touched on a lot around the strategy is really important. It provides a vision for the future. It confirms what an organisation's purpose and values are. And for me, it sets really clear direction for the future, really clear objectives. It's important because what it provides for the business is that overall direction, but in doing so, I think it provides a real clear framework of boundaries in which decisions and challenges and etc. can be made. But if you have a strategy, that's great. The challenge is, if we don't deliver against the strategy, what is the point? How do we ensure that we really effectively use the strategy to drive change within our business, and change being an important word? So a strategy ensures clear direction, it gives you great goals, but what it also does is ensure that it helps you to bring people on the same page. And having a strategy, but ensuring that people feel part of that strategy, giving them real clarity on goals, ensuring that they're delivered and they've got a role that they can play is really, really helpful. Estefana, thank you. If you could just move to the next slide. Thank you. I'm just pulling out and talking about some of these benefits. I didn't want to put lots of words on the slides, but I will cover some of these points. Driving engagement. Engagement for me is really important. Having a goal at the end is important. Everyone's really clear on what they're working to, but ensuring how they play their part in achieving that. And engagement is really important. And I think engagement, not just with people that might be working within that business, but engagement with all parties that need to support you to deliver that strategy. So that could be key stakeholders. In my case, it was a number of different businesses. It was working with a number of different local authorities. Celebrating achievement, I think, is really important, along with milestones. I worked on strategies that were about 5 years. I also worked on strategies of about 15 and 20 years. And if I take you to, Heathrow before expansion was off the table, we were looking at strategies that took us right up until 2050. So it's great to set the clear objectives and have goals, but it's really, really important to celebrate achievements and milestones as and when you get to them. Doing that really helps people to connect with you again. It helps people to think about how they're part of the team, how it further embeds engagement, and really ensures that colleagues and key stakeholders can see the role that they're playing in making this successful. And finally, it does guarantee alignment. You know, it's a great tool to ensure that everyone has had an opportunity to input into the strategy, to comment on the strategy. It becomes really tangible. And in businesses where there are multiple strategies, which I've seen very often, multiple priorities, what it does is start to ensure there's alignment between them. So my final point, I guess, is that there's lots of benefits in terms of having a strategy, but it's important to remember that things change. We couldn't have imagined the unprecedented times that we're facing here today. Life has changed significantly in the last 10 weeks. So bearing that in mind, it's important to ensure that when you do have a strategy, when there are challenges thrown in your direction, whatever they may be, although the vision may remain the same, the purpose may remain the same. It's about how we adapt in a very agile manner and respond to those to ensure the strategy is still fit for purpose. We continue to deliver against that, and we anticipate challenges, and we're ready to adapt and evolve where necessary. If I can move to the next slide, what I'm hopefully trying to do here, and this is my word art, as I say, is try to bring to life in practical terms, what does this mean? And I thought it'd probably be best to give you a real life example of a project that I delivered at Heathrow, and how did we bring that to life in practical terms. We had a very clear employment and skills strategy underpinned by recommendations from the Right Honourable Lord Blunkett and his Independent Skills Task Force. And I have to say, it definitely helped having that sort of recommendation behind us. But we also had board and exec level to ensure that we could execute this strategy effectively. But also what that helped is for people to see how important this strategy is and really get behind it. Within the strategy, there were a number of commitments, number of priorities. And I'm going to call out one of those, which was working with disadvantaged people within local communities. And I led the agenda working across 9 local boroughs, so very complex. And it was about how do we enable these group of vulnerable people to access sustainable employment and apprenticeships. And some of those groups that we called out within those vulnerable groups were returners, those from a care leaving background, physical, non-physical disabilities, and those young NEET or young apprentices. So just to give some context around the size and scale of the challenge, so when I talk about the practical terms, I needed to lead what was, I feel now, and was absolutely at the time, business change on the agenda. I was employed by Heathrow Airport, who are one employer of over 400 employers at the airport. Heathrow employ about 6,500 people, but at Heathrow, operating across 400 businesses, there are over 76,500 people. So my challenge really to make this successful was, how do I engage with all of those businesses and get them to buy in to what might be perceived as a Heathrow strategy? How do I get them on board? How do I not just verbally get them to buy into it, but actually for me, the clear difference was about enabling real people from these vulnerable groups actually accessing opportunities. So a number of things that we had to do, and I've captured there on the screen, is just some of the words, I guess, in terms of the challenges, what we really had to consider as we went through this focus. Sarah talked a lot around communication and engagement when she did her session, and I think the biggest part for me was absolutely on engagement and communication with key stakeholders. You know, how do we get them to understand the benefits? How do we get them to understand the risks? But also, how do we ensure that we're supporting them to understand how this does complement their own strategies within their business? And it wasn't just about building engagement, it was about building trust, building relationships that you could maintain, really, really strong relationships. Communication was absolutely clear. We needed to have clear communication, but also be really clear on our narrative. What was it that we were trying to achieve, and what was it that we wanted from these stakeholders that we wanted to get involved? I also used a lot of external relationships, so industry bodies, sector skills councils. I worked very closely with the London Living Wage Foundation, with business in the community, and they really helped to elevate the agenda and move it forward, and I guess demonstrate for me to other businesses the art of the possible. If any of you operate in businesses that have a union presence, I would also encourage you to engage with the unions very early on and bring them on the journey. They are very responsive, and on this agenda, we're extremely supportive. I think calling out the risks is also important, so people are aware. have those difficult conversations at the beginning, start to work through them early on. And yes, as I referenced earlier, you might then have to be flexible, you might have to be, change things in terms of the direction you might be aiming to go to, but be flexible. You will get there in the end, but think about how other people play their part. Having a strong and believable sponsor is also a definite tick box for me. I was able to get a strong sponsor who had very good influence. Not always important, but good to get them up front. And you can roll them out when you need them, and more often than not, you do need them, and they can really help and leverage relationships and enable you to get further support and buy-in. And finally, I think learning from others. As I said, there was over 400 employers working at Heathrow, and I used them to come along and showcase to other businesses at stakeholder events why they've bought into the strategy, their experience, the positive and negative, so that they were able to really demonstrate why it was important to get involved. They were the voice of the colleagues, if you like, and brought people on the journey. So hopefully I've just given you some good insight into the importance of a strategy, how you get buy-in from individuals, from businesses, from stakeholders, and I guess why it's important to get that buy-in. In practical terms, hopefully I've shared with you some of the processes that I've been through, some of the challenges that you need to consider when applying the strategy. So my final slide that I wanted to share is, what did we actually achieve? And it's great me telling you, we've got a strategy, we put all these practical terms in. Some of these projects working with these disadvantaged people started in early 2019, some of them later in the year. But what I've got here on my slide is just some of the visuals from the Heathrow site to show what we achieved. As a collective, we got our businesses at Heathrow to sign up to the Care Leaver Covenant, and we supported just 3 case studies just to show you there of real people into employment or into apprenticeship. So it wasn't easy, it was a real challenge. It absolutely needed a lot of tenacity, a lot of engagement. Having a sponsor was key, but following practical steps, remembering your end goal, bringing people on the journey with you, and I think ensuring that you can remember what that goal is. Our goal for year 1 was achieved. We successfully placed over 50 people from those vulnerable groups into apprenticeships and employment at the airport. And what that enabled my team and I to do is build transformational relationships. We inspired growth, and we definitely changed people's lives for the better. Thank you. Over to you, Jill.
Thanks, Karima. So I've got several screens open, so I'm juggling. Someone's just said, by the way, which was lovely to have insightful thinking by both speakers so far. And someone's raised, which I might leave to a general discussion at the end, which would make sure we've definitely got time for. They also want to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment and what should organisations do regarding equality strategies. And it might be good to bring everyone in on that at the end. And the only other point that came up is, in terms of those barriers to people coming in to do apprenticeships from a bit of D&I perspective, what would you say that some of the simplest barriers are? What are the some that are so obvious, but to perhaps when you're told, but not that obvious unless someone says it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of barriers, and one of them is just even the application process. We were working with businesses that already put this list of we require before they even consider who that apprentice is. Now, we promoted young and old apprentices, but remove the barriers at the start of it. A lot of it was around going back into education and talking about advice and career strategies. And the reason I reference that is we had an individual that did a degree in maths and came to us and said, could you get us a job in retail at the airport? And when we started to have a conversation with him, we didn't realise he had a degree in maths, and he was told at school that means that he's great at maths, he could be an accountant, he can work in the financial sector. We signed him up to a degree apprenticeship to become a quantity surveyor. So I think it's about industry really trying to understand, how do they remove barriers that they put there accidentally? How do they help work with the FE, the HE, the schools to ensure people are aware of the opportunities? And I think employers and training providers are really important. People need additional support. People need additional investment. And I think, yes, it is investment, and it does take a lot of time at the beginning. But gosh, if you invest that time at the beginning, you will have engaged people. You will have people that want to stay with your business, and they will be delivering some great stuff for you. So I think it's bringing all of those elements together.
Brilliant. I'm really conscious of time, and I'm conscious of those 2 questions we've had, the Black Lives Matter one and the returners to work, which I want to do at the end with everyone. Estefan, if we move on, because we'd now like to introduce Neil, who is GCHQ's Neurodiversity Champion, I should say, sorry. Neil is joining us by phone only. So Neil, I hope you are okay. I know we've had a few IT issues. So I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, good morning, Jill. Thanks to 5% Club for inviting me. Thanks to DSS for hosting the webinar. Really great to be here. My name's Neil. I'm GCHQ's Neurodiversity Champion. You may have heard of GCHQ. GCHQ is one of 3 intelligence agencies in the UK, alongside MI5 and MI6. Our mission is to keep the UK safe through things like counter-terrorism, serious and organised crime, and also in the cyberspace. So the National Cyber Security Centre is part of GCHQ, and their mission is to keep the UK safe online. We have an unusually high proportion of neurodiversity in our workforce. If the population average is about 1 in 10, then we expect GCHQ's workforce has about 1 in 6 people on the neurodiversity spectrum working for us. Why is that? Because we solve seemingly impossible problems to keep you safe. Carlos mentioned Ada Lovelace earlier on. Our most famous character from history is Alan Turing. You'll have read books or seen films about how he and everyone in Bletchley solved the Enigma machine encryption and brought World War II to a close a couple of years early. So in GCHQ, we need world-class mathematicians. We need world-class software developers and cybersecurity experts. We need people who can spot patterns and anomalies in data, and that leaves us with a highly neurodiverse workforce. Next slide, please. Just to cover what is neurodiversity. So neurodiversity are conditions that cause people to think differently. And there's a list of them on the screen. You might have come across some of those. All of these are technically disabilities and covered by the Equalities Act, but one of the things that we've done in GCHQ is separate out the disability label from the neurodiversity label. We know from our own workforce experience that most people with a neurodiversity do not consider themselves to be disabled. So one really practical step that we took was to rename our Disabled Persons Office into our Disability and Neurodiversity Service to take that label away from accessing the support that people might need. Next slide, please. So what does neurodiversity look like in the workplace? So it'll give you a high creativity workforce. So people with dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD are often ahead of their time. They're often the ones that are solving the problems that the neurotypical folks in the workforce haven't yet even realised are problems. It'll give you a highly specialised workforce, so particularly with autism spectrum conditions and hyper-focus, people can be world-class in very, very niche areas. And it can give you high degrees of accuracy as well. So people with autism and learning difficulties, for example, once they've learned a process, they can repeat it highly accurately and are quite happy doing a really repetitive process. So those are some of the sorts of advantages that you get in a workforce with high neurodiversity. It brings challenges as well, of course, particularly around social interaction, autism spectrum conditions, struggling with things like facial expressions, body language, understanding metaphor. A lot of the conditions having difficulty with executive function, time and deadlines, for example, communications difficulties, and some sensory overload. So those are the types of things that we're going to have to tackle if we've got high neurodiversity in our workforce to increase inclusion. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you 3 top tips from our experience of having a high neurodiversity in our workforce. The first one is make your organisation accessible. The second one is to create affinity groups. And the third one is to create an action plan. So to step through those then, next slide. in order to make your organisation accessible, so we could do a whole webinar on accessibility of your organisation for neurodiversity. There are lots of aspects to this. Think about recruitment. Could you do work trials to bring people in and demonstrate what they can do in a team situation rather than a more traditional CV and interview type approach? Work trials are the gold standard at the moment for recruitment of a neurodiverse workforce. But if you're not able to do that, then things like allowing videos for people to pitch what they can do rather than written work, providing questions in advance of interviews are all adjustments that can help. The working environment is a big one with a lot of neurodiverse people expressing sensory overload. So creating a working environment that's suitable for them. It might need to be quiet, it might need to have adjustable lighting, it might need to be away from sounds and smells like the microwave and where people are brewing their coffee. Really practical working environment things that can massively increase productivity. And adjustments, as I've already said, we've removed neurodiversity and disability labels. Another thing we've done in GCHQ is we don't demand a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis of a neurodiverse condition. If somebody identifies as neurodiverse and feels like they need adjustments to deliver their best at work, then we make that accessible to them. So top tip number one, make your organisation accessible. Next one, please. The second one is around creating affinity groups. Affinity groups are essentially support networks. I say affinity groups plural because not all neurodiversity issues are the same. In GCHQ, we have two. We have one for people with autism spectrum conditions, and we have a Think Differently group for people with things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and ADHD. They are member-led and organised. They're support groups to support each other, to help each other with casework, and to identify the adjustments that they most need to improve inclusion and to start working to do that inclusion improvement. The role of the Accountable Senior Champion, of which I am one, is to help the group when it gets to issues that it can't resolve it for itself. So breaking through the systemic blockers that might be in an organisation and helping add a bit of weight, clout, the sponsorship voice that Karima was talking about to help break through some of those difficult issues. So second tip is to create affinity groups. Next one, please. My final tip is to create an action plan. Now, this is obvious, right? But if you create an affinity group, that doesn't in itself improve inclusion. Getting the affinity group to identify the things that most need to change, to prioritise them, and then to work through using all the business skills that you use against any other business problem is the way to actually get traction and actually generate change every day for people who have neurodiversity in your workforce. That's a picture of ours that you can see on the slide. You'll see we've made it accessible from the point of view of easy to read for our dyslexic staff. And then we've got a version of it underneath that details all of the resources that can be allocated to these items, who's delivering, what's the target date, all of the business discipline that you'd expect to see under that. So my final top tip is to create an action plan. Last slide, please. So to summarise then, in high neurodiverse workforces, make your organisation accessible, create affinity groups, and create an action plan. Thank you. Back to Jill.
Right, thanks ever so much, Neil. That was a really great overview of neurodiversity, something that I think a lot of us think we know about and don't necessarily. A question is about neurodiversity and apprenticeships. In terms of your view, how easy is it to recruit someone from a neurodiverse background into an apprenticeship? Is there a barrier there between fit of what that person's abilities and skills and persona is into something that's, you know, a predefined learning module?
Yeah, we've had quite a lot of success in recruiting neurodiverse people into our apprenticeships programs. It's one way where people can demonstrate what they can do on the job in your actual work environment, in your actual teams. I think the last intake of apprentices we had was about 40% neurodiverse, something like that. That's quite typical of us as an organisation. It's quite typical of us looking for the skills that we look for, but really simple things like saying that you welcome applications from people who have a neurodiversity and having a discussion with them about how to make the recruitment process more accessible to them just opens it up and stops people self-selecting out and saying, I don't have what it takes to work for that organisation. So something as simple as just stating that you welcome applications from can be massively powerful. And yeah, we've definitely seen the apprentice route as being a good pipeline for people with neurodiversity.
Great. And actually someone's just posted a comment rather than a question saying, you know, the presentation absolutely underlies the value that neurodiversity brings to the workplace and of course to our safety and well-being. So that's a great comment. Thank you very much, that person. I'm conscious of time. We want to stick to time. I would like to invite our two other panellists, Karima and Sarah, to join us back, and let's do some of the general questions. If I outline, I've got some 3 areas that people have raised, and if I go through them all, and then we'll take one at a time, just to give our panellists a bit of a time to gather themselves. Someone wants to talk about is there a risk encouraging all age groups into apprenticeships reduce the number left for young people? I think that's a particularly pertinent issue at the moment with the prospect of sadly high youth unemployment because of as a result of COVID. So I think a good discussion around that might be quite useful. We'll come back to that. As I mentioned, someone's asked about in relation to everything that's going on in the world and the issues raised by Black Lives Matter, what should organisations be doing regarding equality strategies? So we'll come on to that. And sorry, I have to go into another box, the wonders of technology and learning curve for me. And someone was also raising about returners programmes, that these have sometimes been seen as exclusive to parents as opposed to those returning to, say, engineering or scientific roles. How can we make them more inclusive? So going through those, perhaps we'll take, because I know, Sarah, you would be happy to kick off on the Black Lives Matter issue, which of course is exceptionally topical at the moment. Would you like to come in on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started at the Home Office, I think today's day 16. So I started my role knowing that I was going into, you know, a very high profile environment at a very high profile time. We are dealing with and supporting the Windrush report. And one of the things that I think is really clear to me is that the conversation that I've seen evolve in the last 2 weeks around the tragic incidents surrounding George Floyd's death are about being vocal, but being able to listen, and being able to listen to Black colleagues to understand and to question how they're feeling, and making sure we can help them to navigate the challenges and the turmoil that many people are feeling, but not in any way trying to speak on their behalf, or, and this sounds really, and Neil mentioned it earlier, it sounds obvious, but not asking people to relive their pain. You know, we can often fall into the trap, especially in the D&I space, of saying, you know, we need to listen to lived experience and we need to listen to stories. The challenge is that somebody who is just constantly asked to repeat the same things but never sees any action is you know, it's not going to build your environment, it's not going to build their environment, and it's not going to be cognizant of where most organizations and groups want to be. So I think the pieces for me that have been really key, and the messages that I've been clear about, are use of language. Don't clumsily walk into using BAME as an acronym. BAME is a term that is most definitely used in the diversity statistics space, but it shouldn't be a coverall or sweep up for using Black, Asian and minority ethnic terminology when we're talking about the communities that we serve and that we represent. So being vocal, being acutely aware of what you're saying in terms of language, and listening. listening to colleagues, listening to the temperature. Take the temperature of your organisation. If you're doing something, and look at what you're doing through the optics of those particular groups. And I think that accounts for everything that we've spoken about today, whether we're going to talk about returners, young people moving into apprenticeships where they don't see an opportunity for them. This is about being responsive and being agile, to responding quickly to what our organisation wants. And if you've got senior leadership that are willing and wanting to contribute and to share, to role model those good behaviours, then support them. I mean, they might need some help putting it into the right terms, but translating that will, the small amount of time that you take now to translate that with them will be incredibly powerful for the future. And having an ally and an advocate to amplify those voices at that level will definitely inspire other people to participate as well, and moving towards sort of anti-racism terminology rather than just looking at ethnicity and race. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, and Karima or Neil, I don't know if either of you want to come in on that. I mean, Karima, I know that, you know, where you were based in Heathrow, a massively ethnically diverse area. Is there anything you'd want to add? You're on mute at the moment. That's great.
Yeah, I think Sarah summarised it quite well and made some really, really key points. I guess just to add to that, and she has referenced it, but it's around taking care of the people currently in the workplace. You know, they're at this time, it's around ensuring we're providing the right support that they may need, whether that's emotional support, whether it's actually time out that they want to go out and be, you know, as part of the protest. I think we need to talk about social distancing, but, you know, how do we allow them that time if that's what they want to do? And I think, you know, this is also time for businesses that maybe feel a bit nervous about getting it wrong. What do we have to do, or what should we be doing? Are we doing it the right way? And we referenced, Neil referenced it and I referenced it, bring in some of the experts, speak to charities or speak to other organisations, so that if you need to review policies or ensure that we're promoting, you know, things in our L&D space the right way, we're getting some advice to make sure we do it the right way.
Great, thank you. Neil, I don't know if you want to add anything on there, or should we move to the next question?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in and share what we're doing in response at the moment. I mean, racism is rare in our organisation, but sadly not unheard of. And what we're doing is starting a conversation about that. We're making it real by allowing people who've experienced racism to say what form that took and what it was like for them, so that we widen a broader appreciation of what's going on in our own organisation. So starting a conversation, providing a mechanism for people to make it real and tell their real life stories, either directly or anonymously.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm conscious to say for time. I'll move on to the next question, if I may. So I thought it's a very pertinent point. You know, is there a risk that we're encouraging all age groups into apprenticeships, that this might reduce the number left for young people? I'm sure people at the DfE are probably struggling with this at the moment. So, you know, young people are increasingly worried about their future education and career opportunities post-COVID. You know, but yeah, I know the club, you know, we talk about the whole reskill, upskill opportunity, which is a whole social mobility thing, a whole D&I thing. So how do we balance that of not taking those opportunities away from young people, but also opening up apprenticeships more broadly in the fantastic way that they can help people of all age groups? Who would like to kick off? So, Karima, do you want to? Oh, sorry, no, Sarah, you go then. Yeah.
No, it's okay. So I think the really powerful thing about, it's a really useful question actually, because it sort of comes back down to the D&I question that we get asked all the time, which is, you know, if we put all our eggs into this particular community basket and we're representing and providing opportunities through positive action for this group, what about this group when they come? And I think it's really important that we understand that this is not a pie. This is not one thing that needs dividing up equally. There will be a really sensible group of communities out there that are looking at how we can compartmentalize the need. So at the moment, the focus is on a need to really provide those young people an avenue, an aspirational avenues of where they can get apprenticeships in the future. So it might be that organisations look at their ratios of apprenticeships and look at their age demographic, whether they can representatively help and change the dynamic to introduce and welcome more young apprentices in, and in time move back towards the current status quo, which is looking at older apprentices. So I don't think this is an either or. I think it's a very much sliding scale. My recommendation would be that people look at the very much like Neil, look at the routes in and understand how we can help our business outcome, but also help the community that are most in need at that time.
Mm-hmm. Karima, do you want to add anything on to that?
Yes, I think just to add, for me, just as Sarah said, I think it's really important that it's offered, those opportunities are offered to everyone. And the reason I say older apprentices as well, COVID as well as pre-COVID, there is we are shifting, jobs are shifting, technology is shifting, and therefore there will be a gap of that middle or older age demographic that will become unemployed, or roles will change, and therefore that reskilling for me is, I think, really important. If we don't reskill, we're not going to be able to ensure people have careers. And if we don't reskill, I did a lot of work at Heathrow around tackling in-work poverty, and in-work poverty is really prevalent. So if we don't ensure that they're offered to those older apprentices, I think we could almost be supporting that in-work poverty. But at the same time, I think the young apprentices are extremely important. I think we're going to see a real impact on NEET numbers, and of course, as there are more people who, unfortunately, I believe over the next few weeks or months will be made redundant, they will be maybe better placed to take on roles because of their level of experience than those younger people. And that's where I think this split of ensuring there's real energy and focus and targets, if you like, that businesses have on those young people so they're not disadvantaged, and ensuring those targets are maybe bigger for them, but not forgetting those older generations because of in-work poverty, careers, and other points that I just mentioned.
Great, thank you. Neil, I don't know if you've got anything to add, but I'm conscious we've got 3 minutes left. Do you mind if I move on to the final question that we did have? Sorry, you can turn on this one if you want first. So Caroline, apologies, we've squeezed yours in at the end, but it's about the returnerships, that sometimes that can be just seen as about parents as opposed to those saying going into engineering or scientific roles. How can we make them more inclusive to other experiences, especially with apprenticeships in mind? Neil, I don't know if that's a relevant one for GCHQ, and if you want to come in on that.
It's an interesting one with our current experience, actually, of having more of our staff working from home, as everybody has, and working in some really different ways. And what we're finding is that it gives everybody the opportunity to make the contribution they can make when they can make it. And that's not necessarily in an office, and it's not necessarily between 9 a.m. and 5 a.m. Monday to Friday. So I think we will learn from our current experience to offer a wider set of working practices and working offers, so that we can get returners in whichever way they can most make a contribution. But definitely, we've aspiration to get more mid-career experienced science and tech skilled people into our business, and it's our job to make sure that there are routes open to them to contribute the way they best can.
Right. I'm conscious we've got 2 minutes left, and I know Carlos wants to say one more thing, and I want to do one more housekeeping thing. Karima or Sarah, do you want a 30-second soundbite on there? Karima?
I'm happy to just say I think it's important it's not just returners, i.e. parents, and I think my reference earlier about that reskilling, so individuals that maybe never had the opportunity to get the qualification or do the job that they wanted to do, or as the industry and the economy has changed, has now got an interest for, those are our returners, and it's got to be in broader. And I think it's a bit around education for businesses, education around apprenticeships, what are they, education around what do we mean by returners. And I think if we can get that right, we can get businesses to think really broadly when they come to strategy.
Sarah, would you like to say one more thing? I've just seen your little message pop up. I'll give you 20 seconds.
So I'll read out basically the comment I just made, which was, I think to sweep all this up, I think the returners piece would be much better amplified if people used role models and we used storytelling to be able to break the myths of what can and can't be done, and it fits into the apprenticeships piece as well.
Yeah,
thank you.
Great, thank you. Apologies for rushing everyone, but it was great. We had such rich questions. Several people, I think, because they missed it at the beginning, yes, the recording is going to be available on our website and Digital Skills Solutions website. We'll probably just have to edit the beginnings and the ends a bit, so that will be available, and the slides will also be available. And someone's asked, can they connect to the speakers? So we'll cover that off separately and let you know. This only leads me to say a massive thank you to our speakers. We've had lots of positive comments come through, which is fantastic. Thank you. And Carlos, I'm going to hand to you for the final closing comments.
Oh, Jill, thank you very much. What an honour. I think it's been a fantastic hour, really informative. I think I would like to add 2 bits, because just for people to go away with, in terms of apprenticeships and returners and the approach that we take, I think there needs to be some real ingenuity, because we all know these are very new times, and I think the old rules sort of don't apply. And there's 2 things that have been mentioned. One is the idea of an apprenticeship guarantee. So I know that our local MP supported that when that was mentioned at Prime Minister's Questions Time 2 Thursdays ago. And I think if people can do any lobbying on behalf of that. I think the other thing is we know that there's a wealth of unspent money around apprenticeships. And actually, perhaps now is the time to give employers a certain level of trust and freedom in understanding and determining how that money's used. With apprenticeships and more broadly still, to really kickstart some of the initiatives that we've been talking about today.
That's great.
That's me. Thank you ever so much, Jill.
Thank you, Carlos. And lastly, just say thank you again to Digital Skills Solutions, our speakers, and to Estefana in the background managing us all, and to all our attendees. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.